started. You can all see me and or see the screen and hear me and all that. Okay, cool. All right, so thanks everybody for joining us for I believe this is the fourth session of our summer webinar series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Anna Weber, and I am now the former Student Affairs Representative for the Society for Conservation Biology North America. Our webinar today is focused on project management. But before we get into that, I'm just going to give a little overview of what our organization is all about and what we're doing, in case anyone is not familiar with it. So this webinar is being hosted by the Society for Conservation Biology North America, which is a regional group of the Global Society for Conservation Biology. Um, as a North American region, we're a professional society dedicated to advancing the science and practice of conserving Earth's biological diversity. Our vision is a world with thriving biodiversity, ecosystems, and human connections. And our mission is to provide an environment that welcomes, supports, and empowers diverse students and professionals to contribute, advance, and apply conservation science. So there's a lot going on there, but to summarize it, we're a really broad organization with members from all kinds of backgrounds and from all kinds of career paths within the conservation field. That includes biologists, social scientists, conservation managers, and decision makers. Really anything that's related to conservation is welcome in our society. So for our members, we host networking and professional development events like this one. Um, and we also hold conferences in North America every 2 years, with the next one being in 2026 in Milwaukee. And the global level of society also, in addition to their international conferences, they also publish three publications that members can subscribe to keep up to date on conservation research and news. So if you're interested in learning more about our society, feel free to just scan this QR code. It just takes you to our website where you can learn a little bit more about us and join if you're interested. So this webinar has been organized by the Student Affairs Committee. Our committee is dedicated to providing support to students, both graduate and undergraduates, and early career professionals by organizing networking events, workshops, and professional development opportunities, um, both virtually and in person during our biennial conferences. So I've been the chair of the Student Affairs Committee um, for the past 3 years, but as of I think 2 days ago, my term is now concluded, and I'm excited to be passing the torch now to Jumana Khan, who is going to be the next student representative, while I'll be transitioning to a new role on the board. So if you're an SCBNA member and you're interested in working with Jumana on developing programming for students, please feel free to email that address there at the bottom, and we can add you to the email list. And I'll be putting that email address and any other links or whatever I'm mentioning will all be in the chat later. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the fourth of our summer webinar series. This series is focused on building technical skills that are generally useful to early career folks in conservation. So the next one after today's is on science communication for the public, I think with a focus on art and illustration. And that'll be held on June 9th. And then after that, they're scheduled approximately every 2 weeks. And I believe the last one is sometime in mid-August. But the full list of whatever's scheduled, as well as links to past webinar recordings, are all available on our website. So our past webinars that have been recorded and can be viewed include sessions on how to write grants, how to do job applications, networking, and career development. So feel free to check this out. There's a lot of really good information in our past webinars. So now I'm going to briefly mention a couple other projects we've been working on before I introduce our speaker. So first of all, our education committee is hosting a conservation education forum on August 5th and 6th. So this is a virtual workshop for educators in conservation, intended to give them a chance to make new connections and to share pedagogical support to foster excellent education in conservation. So this workshop consists of 2 half days with 5-minute speed talks and 1 hour workshops to demonstrate educational modules. And you can find more information about these on our website. So the other project that Student Affairs Committee has going on right now is a crowdsourcing list of non-US federal opportunities for students. So given uncertainties around federal funding for science and academia in the US right now, a lot of early career folks are finding themselves losing funding for their projects and finding fewer career opportunities than have been available in the past. So we thought it might be helpful for us to crowdsource this list of opportunities that are not reliant on federal funding. And this includes scholarships, assistantships, fellowships for graduates and postdocs, research opportunities for undergrads, internships, and grant opportunities. So the goal of this is to produce a list of openings that we can be relatively confident are more or less secure. Maybe they're funded through the state or a nonprofit or a private foundation. Um, Anyone can add an opportunity to our list using a Google form, which is on the top QR code there. Um, and then the links to these are also on our website, and again, will be in the chat. And then the list can be viewed at that lower QR code. So we only started doing this a couple of months ago. There's not a whole lot on the list yet, but the more people who contribute, it will just get better as time goes on. So please, if you come across something that you think fits the bill for this list, please go ahead and add it using that Google form. And now it is time to introduce today's speaker, Bernie Traversari, who is SCBNA's very own Director of Operations and Programs. Bernie's background includes research in developmental ecology and amphibian conservation, and positions in nonprofit leadership, community outreach, and science education. Before joining SCBNA, Bernie served as the Director of Science Outreach at Edgewood College in Madison, Wisconsin, where he led the development and implementation of community-based science education programs for underrepresented communities across the state. He is also the board vice president of the Urban Learning Collaborative, a Milwaukee-based nonprofit aimed at training the next generation of K-12 educators. Bernie is passionate about connecting scientists with community leaders, grassroots organizations, and students of all ages through his role at SCBNA, all in an effort to protect our natural world. Bernie earned a bachelor's in biology from Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, and a master's in biology from Washington State University. And he now lives and works in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with his wife and their cat. I would just like to add to that, if you've attended these webinars before or any of our other events, you should know that Bernie is always the one behind the scenes who makes everything happen and really keeps SCBNA functioning. Definitely excited to hear what Bernie has to say about project management. And with that, I will happily turn it over to Bernie.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that introduction, and thanks everyone for being here. This is really exciting. I've been looking forward to talking a bit more about this specific session and imparting some of the experience and knowledge that I've gained over the last few years and engaging in different types of projects and having to manage those in different ways. I also wanted to thank everyone who registered for this session that was initially scheduled for last week. I had an unfortunate scheduling complication, so we had to move it back by a week. So thank you for attending if you initially registered expecting to attend last week's session. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see it? Well, okay, great. So as I was preparing for today's session, I was trying to think through what would be most useful for folks in attendance. And I made a couple of assumptions about our current attendees. It may be that you are really experienced in project management. And so this session might be more of a refresher, or it might offer you different perspectives on tools that you could use for your current projects. Or it might be that you're completely new to project management and just want to know what's available out there in order to make things easier for you. Or you're somewhere in between, right? Give me just 1 second. Don't know what's going on. Okay. Oops, sorry about that. Actually, okay, great. So as I was mentioning, you might be super experienced with project management, you might be new to it, or you might be somewhere in between, right? You've managed a couple of projects, and maybe you had initial experience in project management through your undergraduate thesis or graduate thesis, right? But now you're starting to get a bit more responsibility because you've transitioned in your career and are in a new position, maybe with a nonprofit, for-profit organization, or you're still in academia, just managing a lot more projects. So in order to meet all of those expectations, the approach that I'm taking today is I'm going to go through what I believe are the biggest challenges for project management as of the moment in our very interconnected digital world, where projects are becoming a lot bigger and more complex, right? And then as a result of that, give you some ideas as to potential tools that you can use, but more than that, try to get you to think about the benefits that you should be looking out for in any of the project management tools that you decide to utilize. So I'm going to be listing some of those benefits, giving you a couple of examples of tools that I've used in the past. And then I'm also going to talk about the tools that I currently use in my role as Director of Operations and Programs for SCB&A, because I believe it's relevant to use real world examples. And examples that both Anna and Jumana are really familiar with, because that's what I use to communicate with them and prepare stuff like this series. And so the goal of all of that, if nothing else, if you get nothing else from this presentation, other than how to best streamline your workflow using some of these tools and thinking about some of those benefits that you need to get out of, then I've done my job today. Okay. So what do I see as some of the biggest challenges in terms of project management, right? And this applies both to early career project managers, or mid to late career project managers as well. The first challenge is that projects are becoming increasingly more complex. I mentioned that before, especially in conservation. We are seeing that projects, even when they take a local focus or a local approach, they usually incorporate a lot of regional partners. So it might be the case that you're working with a lot more people, you have a lot more stakeholders that you're engaging with, a lot more collaborators that have a say in how your project should progress. And there's a lot more tasks, more moving pieces that need to happen in order for the project to be a success. That is good in a lot of ways. It means that there's a lot more collaboration in our field, but it also means that getting the project done is a bigger task, right? And so there's a lot more complexity that is now part of project management that might not have been the case in the past, where projects were a lot more locally focused, or there wasn't a big inclination to have as many collaborations, as many stakeholders partake in any one project. Another challenge that I see, especially now in our digitally interconnected work world, is that remote work is a lot more common, which is great, but that means that teams are usually dispersed, if not only across time zones, could be dispersed across different global regions, which makes real-time communication and real-time strategizing difficult. In all of the committees that I work with SCB&A, all of our programs are committee-based, and we have committee members from all over the US and even Hawaii, Alaska, and even other parts of the globe. And so that makes it really difficult to find a common set of time to talk through a specific project, and makes it really difficult to agree on meeting times. And so that just, again, adds to the complexity of projects and adds to the complexity of getting those tasks done in order to move those projects forward. Another challenge that I see is that we live in information silos, right? I mentioned before that even when projects are more locally focused, they are incorporating a lot more regional collaboration. But that means that each local partner in that regional collaboration still holds just one piece of the whole puzzle. And that piece is usually in its own, repository of information. That information is siloed in one way or another. And so communication breakdowns are frequent, right? It's very easy to fall into a trap of not knowing who has what information when, right? And not being able to share it effectively and on time, or I should say real time, and not having a centralized way to share that information with all of your project partners, right? And so that also causes friction, and again, adds to the complexity of just managing any project. And so all of this builds to, having a lack of a centralized system that can facilitate a lot of these challenges, that can help ease a lot of these challenges. And because, and not having a centralized system to facilitate a lot of these challenges, then that leads to inefficiency, right? It might be that you're getting your project done, but it's taking longer to get it done. Or it might be that you're getting it done, but it's creating frustration and friction with your partners, which in turn might affect future projects. And so the goal of today is to think about, what are some of the benefits that I should look out for in terms of project management tools that can help me address these challenges? But I think more deeply than that is, how can I utilize all of these tools to create a centralized system that allows me to manage a project in a way that reduces friction, increases efficiency, and makes things easier for everyone. I think that should be the goal. And so as I'm going through all of the benefits that I'm going to mention, my central idea always will be to say this is how you create a centralized system to manage your project with all of your different collaborators, and make sure that all of the moving pieces are actually moving forward in order to get those projects done. Okay. And so the first benefit that I think everyone should look out for in terms of project management tools is looking for tools that allow for real-time collaboration and communication. So this means that you are essentially trying to recreate an in-office experience. Like I mentioned before, remote work is a lot more common now, and that's fantastic. But it does mean that you are no longer in the same space with folks. You can talk about issues that arise in the moment, in real time as effectively. You can just go across the hallway and talk to your colleague about a specific issue, right? And so finding tools that allow for a semblance of that, of those opportunities is really useful and really effective. Two of the tools that I've used in the past in order to achieve this are Slack and Discord. And you might already be familiar with one or both of these tools. And they function in pretty much the same way. They allow for communication to take place within groups, even within subgroups, and amongst individuals in real time, right? So through one platform. Think of it as a more complex and I think versatile, WhatsApp or iMessage platform, right? It allows for a lot more communication in real time. And in some cases, it even allows for sharing of documents or information in real time. Like Slack is really good at that. And so it kind of creates that semblance of being in the same space with all of your team working on the same project. I know of organizations that even agree to be on Slack at specific times of the day and only communicate through Slack in order to better recreate that experience of being in an office with your colleagues. And that could be incredibly productive and incredibly powerful for folks that really depend on that real-time communication. SVNA even has a student affairs channel on Slack in order to more effectively communicate with our student members, especially if there's something that we want to talk about in the moment. So Slack is, I think, the more commonly used of these two. Discord is a platform that began sort of in the gaming world, and became popular in the gaming world. But I've seen a lot more organizations utilize it now. In a similar way as Slack, you're also able to create discussions and create your own platforms for communication within groups or amongst individuals in an effective way. But I think more than that, it takes advantage of the idea of gamification, right? So it allows you to incorporate badges and awards in games as a part of that communication strategy, right, with your team, which at least in the educational world is really effective in grabbing attention and maintaining attention amongst team members. But I think it also adds an element of fun, right? Fun and collaborative spirit that I think is really important, especially again, if your team is remote, right? You want to create that sense of that collegiate sense, right? And that sense of being a group that not only works together, but can have fun together as you're engaging with your projects. And so I've seen a lot more of Discord being used at the moment, and I've encouraged folks to use it if they feel that they can take advantage of that gamification aspect of it. I'm even part of a Discord channel right now with a really great group of environmental practitioners in Milwaukee, and we chose to use Discord because we wanted to add a bit more fun to our conversations rather than just having to talk about work all the time through Slack. So both of these are really great platforms to achieve real-time collaboration and communication. But as with most platforms, the more integrations and functionality you want to add to them, the more you have to pay for them, unfortunately, right? So after a certain number of team members, or if you want to add certain types of functionality or integrate other applications into both platforms, you're likely to have to pay more. at least a monthly fee. So if you're part of an organization that's budget limited, or you're a grad student and don't have funds from your department to use one of these two tools, then that might be a disadvantage in utilizing one or the other. That is one of the reasons, but not the only reason, why I utilize mostly the applications that come out of Google Suite for all of my work at SVNA. Specifically, I take advantage of Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides, but also Google Chat and Google Meet. If you're not familiar with Google Meet, that's pretty similar to Zoom. It's a video conferencing platform that is very well integrated into pretty much all the applications that exist within Google Suite. And it allows you to have, video calls even in the middle of working with one of these documents or with a file in a collaborative manner. And Google Chat functions in a pretty similar way to Discord and Slack, in that you're able to have real-time conversations and communications with members of your team or even amongst groups within your organization. So I think having all of these things centralized is really useful. And I even created an example of how this can be useful so that we can all kind of work through it right now. So if you have time, or if you have your phone with you, I encourage you to take a picture of the QR code here. It'll guide you to a shared Google Doc that all of us can collaborate on. And I'm actually going to move to that right now. There we go. So this is the shared Google Doc that I created for all of us. And as soon as one person joins in, I can give an example of all the really cool things that you can do with this, and integrating with some of the other tools that Google offers.
Bernie, would you mind dropping the link in the chat?
I can, yes. There we go. Amazing. So we have one person join in. Great. So I think the first really powerful thing about Google Docs is that everyone can write at the same time, right? That's, I think, pretty much the essential aspect of this platform, is that everyone can add to it at the same time. So if folks want to go in and answer this question, I think it would be fantastic. As you're doing that, I'm just going to highlight some of the other cool things that you can do. One of those things up here on the right-hand corner is you can start a meeting in the middle of working on this document in a collaborative fashion. I would be able to start a Google meeting with all of you at the moment and talk through what it is we want to add to the document, what it is that we want to edit in the document. If we think this document is insufficient and want to use something else, like a Google slide or a Google Sheet file, all those are all things that we can do. I can also click on each one of you individually and start a live chat with just you, and go through some of your specific comments, and also go through live comments that you're adding to the document, right? And see if if there's something that I want to chat with you individually, if there's a comment that you have for me specifically. So all of those things, I think, are really, really useful in utilizing Google Sheets and just the Google Suite as a whole, is because you can do a lot of things within the same file. And that just makes it easier. It does take away some of the gamification of, say, Discord, right? There's no badges here. There's no awards. It's not super fancy looking. Same with Slack. There's not an opportunity to have sub conversations or group conversations. It's sort of limited in that fashion. But you can do all of the other things at the same time. You can collaborate on the document, you can chat with each other, you can start a video conference. And I think that's really, really powerful. So thank you all for indulging me in answering this question. And I'm super excited to read that there's some variability in how folks have utilized Google Suite in the past, in terms of school and writing manuscripts. So excited that SVNA was someone's first experience with Google Suite. I have a feeling that's Anna, but I'm not going to make that assumption. Yeah. So that's one of the benefits that I think folks should look out for in any tool. And again, I found that benefit mostly in Google Suite, just because of the aspect of our work and how easy it is for me to share files with all of our board members, all of our committees, even create committee-specific files, restrict access to just a few individuals rather than the entire organization. I think that functionality is also very practical, especially when you're working with very, very large teams. Okay, so the second benefit that I think folks should look out for in project management tools is a centralized document management system. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. I mentioned in the past that information silos are an issue and that can lead to communication breakdowns pretty easily. But in addition to kind of addressing those challenges, I think having a centralized document management system is also important now, because reporting and documenting projects is becoming more important. Not only do you want to assure your stakeholders and collaborators that the information you're sharing and using is safely stored somewhere and that someone has access to that information all the time, but if you're grant funded or if you receive any type of financial support, even donor support, right? You want to make sure that you can say, hey, this is where all that information is. This is where you can access that information if needed. This is where we can use to report on the success of our project. It increases the transparency in how you're utilizing your funding and how you're utilizing the members of your team in trying to achieve the objectives of your project. So having a centralized document management system is really effective to that end. The two tools that I've highlighted here, I think, are pretty familiar to most folks. They are OneDrive and Dropbox. OneDrive is part of Microsoft Suite. I utilized it quite a bit during my graduate program because my university, the entire university used Microsoft Suite. So it just made sense to utilize this as our central document management system. But if you want something that's a bit more versatile, that can be integrated with other programs, say Gmail or even Slack, or I think Discord now as well, then Dropbox is a good alternative. I think Dropbox allows for the same functionality as OneDrive. It allows you to create folders, subfolders, restrict access to those folders to only specific collaborators or individuals, and then access files in those folders accordingly. But it can now be integrated with a variety of different applications. So if you're someone who is not entirely a fan of Microsoft Suite or even Google Suite, then I think Dropbox is a good alternative. It does take a few extra steps to kind of get it set up, but once you do, I think it's pretty effective. In my case, I use Google Drive because it's part of Google Suite. Again, just kind of like moving forward in that direction. I found that Google Drive pretty much achieves the same objectives as OneDrive and Dropbox, and a lot of changes there. I think the one thing that I found to be really useful is to be able to add editor and viewing access to different individuals. So not only can you restrict who can view a folder, but you can also restrict who has access to editing that folder and moving it around. And I think Google Drive also does a really good job of telling you who's going to lose access to a folder if you suddenly decide to move it somewhere else, right? So there's a lot of guardrails in how you manage your information to make sure that you're not inadvertently taking access away from someone or losing a file that someone else needs. And there's also sort of a track record as you're doing that of where the files are being moved to. So being able to keep track of all of that, I think, is really beneficial. And if you're already using Google Suite for other things like writing manuscripts or sharing not Excel, a Google Sheet file, or working to collaborate in a presentation, and you're housing all of that in one same folder, then just means that everything is in one place, easily accessible by everyone in your team. I did the same thing for this slide. As an example, I created a Google Drive folder for everyone who's attending this presentation. You can access it via the QR code. I'm not going to have us go in right now because it's just a folder with documents, but it shows you that I've given you access to the folder, but you should be able to view it, not edit it. I'm the only one with editing capabilities. But if I wanted to, say, have Anna be able to edit, then I could change that within the folder and make it easier for her to do so. And it would tell me, hey, this person now has access to that folder. And if Anna decides to do something, then Anna will be notified by Google that the edits she's making might or might not take away access from me or anyone else in this group. So I think that's really, really beneficial in utilizing Google Drive. Okay, the next benefit that I think you should be looking out for in terms of project management tools is finding a tool that allows for streamlined planning and scheduling. This is so important. As someone who works with, I think it's 5 or 6 standing committees as a part of SCBNA, and now is also helping coordinate 6 committees for our conference next year. Scheduling is essential. If nothing else, it makes life easier for everyone. Everyone is busy, especially for SBNA. Most of our work is done by volunteers who are part of our committees, and those volunteers have day jobs, right? And so making sure that they know when something's coming up and there's a meeting taking place and being reminded about that is really effective. But also just having somewhere where you can keep track of a plan, keep track of any tasks that need to be accomplished within your project and who's in charge of that is really, really essential. 2 of the tools that I've used here, and I forgot to type in the other one, is Monday.com and Asana. We actually piloted both of these at SBNA at one point or another over the last couple of years. They work in pretty much the same way. They allow for you to go in, create a project, and then create either a calendar of events and activities that need to take place and who is in charge of those activities and when they need to be finalized, or also delegate the responsibilities to someone else as a part of your project. You can do that in a variety of different ways. There's a variety of different planning templates that you can utilize, including one called a Gantt template that I think is pretty common. And you can customize things based on your organization's size, your organization's the different responsibilities from members within your organization. And if you're working with members from outside of your organization, you can also create, individual projects for them and even sub-projects for partners if need be. So I think both of these platforms achieve the same objective overall. Monday, I think, is a bit more intuitive than Asana, but Asana allows for a lot more integration of different applications. So if you're someone, again, that wants to be able to use Dropbox and stuff from Microsoft Suite, and then also a little bit of Google, then Asana might be a bit more practical in that sense. It also means that it takes a little bit longer to set things up in Asana and to keep track of everything. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're choosing one of these 2 platforms, is that Monday is a little bit easier to set up, but Asana has a bit more versatility in terms of what you can do and how you can accomplish the different tasks as a part of your project. One thing that I will note, and this really applies to any tool that you utilize, but I think it's really prevalent for specifically planning and scheduling tools, is that it requires you to think about all the other tools that your team members are already using, right? So for me, I work with individuals that have day jobs, and presumably those individuals are using other tools because those tools are either required by their day jobs or because they use them personally, right? So it may be that that they're using Microsoft Suite for work, but Google for their own personal communications, right? And then if I bring in something else like Asana or Monday, it means it's one more thing those individuals need to check. And that extra step in the execution process of any project can create friction. It's surprising how much just adding one more step to keeping track of things and one more step to keeping track of scheduling can add friction and can increase inefficiencies in your project. So it's just something to keep in mind. I mentioned before that we piloted this in SCBNA. We piloted both tools and decided that it wasn't for us because it was one more thing that we need to keep track of. And even though Monday was pretty, self-explanatory and easy to set up, it was still just one more thing that we needed to look out for, right? Folks needed to remember to log into Monday to see what they had to do for their committees. And so that just, if that is going to create inefficiencies for your team, then I would recommend not using either one of these platforms. However, if you can get everyone to use the same platform, it can be really, really effective. So because we decided not to use Monday or Asana, we've instead, again, relied on Google Suite. And I've personally used Google Suite for my own communication, so it was really easy to transition to using it as a part of my job. And for this, I just really use a combination of Calendar, Google Sheets, and I think Google Keep, which is another tool that I've seldom used in the past, but I'm starting to use a bit more, that allows for effective information sharing. But I think Google Calendar is really effective because it allows for not only scheduling meetings, but you can easily incorporate documents from Google Suite as a part of invitations to meetings. So you can drop a Google Doc or a Google Sheet or a Google presentation into the invitation, and folks will be notified of that once the invitation is sent to their calendar. So not only can you let your project collaborators know, hey, this is coming up, but also as a part of this meeting, we're going to talk about this specific document, or we're going to work on this specific document collaboratively. So it might be that you schedule a meeting in Google Calendar, drop in a specific file that you're going to work on, open that file, and then immediately afterwards start a video conference call using Google Meet to work on that file collaboratively. And so you can do that, all of that in just one system, right? Google Sheets, I brought this in because I think Google Sheets is really good at creating a planning structure, like a plan overview of your project, including individual tasks and what needs to be accomplished when by different people, in the same way that you can achieve it with Monday and Asana. But it does take a little bit more work to get it set up. So it's a lot more elbow grease that you have to put into. And so I think in this case, it's really, I do want to go into the example that I set up for everyone, because I think it's going to provide more of a visual aid. So if you can go in and access the document on the QR code, I'll also drop it in the chat, make it a little bit easier. Okay, cool. There we go. So this is the example that I created, right? And this example, what I'm showing you right now, this is a Gantt template. So this is one type of template that you can use for project planning and scheduling and keeping track of tasks and who is in charge of each individual task. But this is something that I could create using Google Sheets. So you, in theory, could create your own Google Sheet document with your own Gantt project template and keep track of everything using that one centralized document, right? And you can store it in a Google Drive. That is part of your centralized document management system that you share with the rest of your team. This template that I'm sharing with you right now was freely available online. So you can actually search for different templates and then just create your own version of those templates in Google Sheet. I believe Google Sheet also offers some templates of its own, but I haven't played around with those too much. So I wanted to show you this example as one way that you can achieve pretty much the same thing that Monday.com and Asana offers, but without having to pay for the cost necessarily. And it is a bit more limited in what applications and integrations you can bring in, and it does require more elbow grease to set up, but it ultimately achieves the same objective. So, and this is, I recommend, if you want to pilot some of this with your organization, maybe try it in Google Sheets first. And then if you find that it's really, really useful, then you can potentially transition into something like Monday.com or Asana, if you want a platform with a lot more functionality. Okay. Amazing. And so this brings us to the last benefit that I wanted to talk about. And that is just having some type of tool that you can rely on for data analysis and reporting. And again, I forgot to include the other one here. But the two examples that I've utilized in the past, and here I'm not sure how much how familiar folks are going to be with either example. One of those is Power BI. This is part of Microsoft's data analysis package. And the other one is SAS. So SAS is commonly used statistical analysis software. It includes other sub-products like JUMP, GMP, that are very common in graduate school. At least I had a lot of experience working with GMP when I was in graduate school. And it's a really powerful tool in analyzing the information, creating graphs, creating visuals, and sharing that information, or being able to use those visuals as a part of your information sharing process. And Power BI achieves the same thing, but it allows for a lot of integration with, say, Microsoft Excel, right? So you can have all of your information in Microsoft Excel and then utilize Power BI to analyze that information, create really cool graphics, and really cool conclusions from your data that you can then share with the rest of your team. Big disadvantage here is that they're both paid products, so you do have to pay a subscription in order to utilize them. I haven't checked the price as of late, but I know they're both somewhat expensive. So if you're not able to access them for that reason, if your institution is not affiliated with either organization and is able to offer these products to you for free, then that might be an impediment. At least that's one that I consider in my work for SFNA is, do we want to invest in something like this? Given our current needs for data analysis and reporting. And at least for us, the answer is no. We don't have a lot of data that we need to analyze, and most of the analysis can be done with other tools. But if you do have a lot of data, especially if you're working on a big project, right, then the investment in one or both of these tools might be worth it. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. And I think in contrast with some of the other tools that I've mentioned thus far, Power BI and SAS do have a learning curve incorporated in them that you need to go through in order to really maximize your use of both products. But I will say that there's a lot of online resources for both of these, a lot of online tutorials. I think there's even like courses that focus specifically on each one of these. So, you can go through them and you can become a lot more acquainted on how to use them effectively and then incorporate them as part of your project management structure. At SFNA, we utilize Google Sheets. That's pretty much the extent of our data analysis and reporting needs. We utilize a lot of Google Sheets to keep track of data, specifically for all of our different programs, our conference, even our webinars. We collect a lot of information from you all after we conclude our webinars to see how we're doing, and we analyze that data using Google Sheets. And then we present it to interested stakeholders. I present it to the rest of our board using slides. It just makes things simpler. But again, that is suitable for us because we don't require a lot of data analysis power as a part of our organizational needs. And I also included an example of this in the previous Google Sheet file that we were all working on with the Gantt template. If you go to the second tab at the bottom of that file, it will give you an example of, data analysis tools that you can use in graphs and visuals that can come out of Google Sheets, and then you can incorporate into some other Google products. And I will say that in a similar way to Calendar, Google Calendar being able to, you being able to drag and drop things into a Google Calendar invitation, and then just opening those things once you have a meeting going on. The same thing happens with Google Sheets. You can drag and drop information from a Google Sheet to a Google slide, and then you'll be able to connect those two files as you're given a presentation or as you're editing, your slides for reporting as need be, right? So again, I think that's really, really useful. Okay, so those are the 4 sort of big benefits I think folks should be on the lookout for in terms of project management tools. And those are some of the examples that I've given. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the goal of all of this is for you to find a way to centralize your project management so that you can make it more effective and efficient for you. I will end these last few slides by saying that for SB&A, we found that Google Suite is a very effective and integrated project management tool. This presentation is not sponsored by Google Suite or by any other of the other projects that I mentioned thus far. But if you are at the beginning of your project management journey, I would strongly recommend trying Google Suite out. I think it's been really effective for us. If you're a part of an organization that has a limited budget or that is small, I think it's really easy for one or two people to kind of be in charge of all of the different applications and data information sharing processes that go into Google Suite, and then have those two people kind of coordinate the work with everyone else that's part of your project. At least that's been my experience. I'm able to organize everything for SB&A using Google Suite, and then share that with the rest of our committees. And it's worked out so great so far. At least that's the feedback that I've gotten from all of our committees, including Anna, who's present here today. So that's, I would encourage folks to try it out, if nothing else, to see if it fits with what you need for your own projects. Okay, so in addition to that, I just wanted to kind of finalize my presentation with a couple of closing thoughts. I think the first of those is just, why centralize your project management at all? In addition to tackling some of the challenges that I mentioned before, I've also mentioned how centralizing project management tools helps increase efficiency. It helps improve transparency for reporting duties, even within your own organization. It makes for better communication, specifically real-time communication and more of a sense of camaraderie amongst the folks that are working with you. It is cost effective in a lot of ways. If you are able to find a tool that kind of fits or checks off all of the benefits that I mentioned thus far for you, at a good price. Sometimes there's discounts for nonprofit organizations for Asana or Monday.com, for example, then that could be a really cost-effective alternative for your organization. Or if you choose to go with something like Google Suite, which is free for most of its applications, unless you want really increased functionality, then again, that might be an effective thing. And it would behoove me not to mention that we are currently in a really challenging funding landscape, especially if you're part of a nonprofit organization or in academia. And so thinking about how to make your work cost effective is worth it. And I think it's worth to discuss that with the rest of your project partners. It also allows for a lot of scalability. So if you start with, say, just a general Google folder for one project with members of your team, you can scale that up and create many subfolders for different projects and many other documents and meetings and all of those other things as your project grows or as more folks are involved in your project. And then it also makes for a more robust security system or set of security processes that you can incorporate into your project management structure, right? I think for us, it's really useful to have all of our information on one centralized location that is backed up in the cloud. We also know exactly who has access to that information through Google Drive, who has access to which folder. And then as a result of that, we know if something goes missing or if something needs to be added, then we know exactly who to reach out for that information. So there's also that aspect of security that I think is really effective in trying to centralize your user project management tools. And then the last thing is that I wanted to mention is, there's a few things that you can do to get started on this. Especially if you're new to project management and you find it overwhelming to do all the things that you need to do in order to get your project to the finish line, or to make sure that all of those moving pieces keep moving forward. These are just a few recommendations that I've gained from my own experience in project management. One of those is defining your workflow. So as you're thinking about your project and you're thinking about what tools you're going to use, identify what are the key project phases and what needs to happen in order to achieve each of those phases. Even just writing them down in a piece of paper or in a Google Doc initially, and just identifying everything in bullet point can be really, really effective. And then you can transition that into more of a project management template, like the Gantt template that I showed before. But being able to define your workflow is really important. That also will help you think about what tool is most effective for your specific type of workflow, right? It might be that you do need something like Asana or Monday.com, or it might be that you're totally fine with just a Discord channel or a Slack channel for your project. In addition to that, I find it really useful to standardize templates for anything that you do, especially if you're using something like Google Suite or Microsoft Suite. Having templates that you can share amongst your collaborators for a specific project is really, really effective. For instance, we have a specific template for webinar series that we utilize within SCP&A. As we're thinking about a new series, regardless of what committee is preparing that series, we know exactly what template to utilize, and that helps streamline our workflow quite a bit because we know exactly what things need to happen for that series to take place. And that goes all the way from scheduling the series to creating descriptions of each webinar session to coordinating with speakers that are going to come in and actually impart that information to our attendees. So having a few standardized templates for all of your project management needs is really effective. Organizing your tasks and documents, I think this kind of goes hand in hand with defining your workflow is also important. Knowing where everything is and where you can find everything just makes for an easier time in sharing information with your team. And then training your team and all of this is super important as well. Jumana, who is our new student affairs representative, knows this. I've met with her, I think, just last week to kind of guide her through our Google Drive folder, where everything is, where our templates for student affairs are located. What do we use each template for? So going through that process of training your team is really important. And it might be that you're not ready to train your team. It might be that you're new to a lot of these tools. And so it might be less about training your teams at time and more about just talking with your team and seeing what works for all of you. And kind of going through the learning process together so that you're all aware of the tools that you're using and how those all fit into a centralized system. And then the last thing that I'll add is that it's useful to also see how you can leverage integrations amongst the different tools that you use. I mentioned that some of the tools are more powerful in incorporating those integrations than others, like Asana or Slack. And so it's worth it to kind of go in and see how you can incorporate those integrations. Even Google Suite allows for a lot of those. So just playing around and seeing what fits in with your project management needs is also important. You don't need to do it. I've found that I don't really need to incorporate a lot of integrations into my day-to-day work with SCP&A. But I did have to do it a bit more with my work as a graduate student, just because of the nature of the work itself. So it really depends on what your project is and who you're working with, and defining what integrations you're going to incorporate. Okay, that's it. That's all the wisdom and knowledge that I have to impart for folks today. I hope this was useful. Again, I realize that this is not an in-depth dive into any of the tools that I've mentioned. But I hope that by going through some of the benefits and thinking about the benefits that you might want to gain out of the project management tools that you choose to utilize, that'll make your project management journey a lot easier. So thank you all for paying attention, and I'll open the floor for questions.
I have a question. I'm curious to ask you a question about people management as well as kind of project management, because I feel like that's another can of worms. How do you handle when you have a group of people who all have sort of different priorities on a project or place different value on the project or just have different capacity levels? How do you kind of coordinate all that to make sure that deadlines still get met and things are getting done as they need to get done?
I think that that's where the first benefit comes in quite a bit, just having open lines of communication and going through that, defining your workflow and defining your tasks and responsibilities stages pretty early on in the project management process is really important. That's going to set you up for success. I think knowing the question of capacity is an interesting one because I think that will define who is able to take care of specific tasks within a project. But then in addition to that, you can also kind of tackle the issue of capacity and also priorities at the same time. So if someone has low capacity but really thinks that this part of a project needs to happen, then you can assign that person that part of the project because it fits in with their priorities, but also maybe it's a small enough part that it also fits in with their capacity. So having those conversations, I think, is really, really important. It's all about communication at that point. And I know you and I have had a lot of those conversations as a part of the Student Affairs Committee. So any other questions? Well, I think if folks don't have any additional questions, I'm always happy to, answer things via email. If you want to get a better sense of how, I utilize some of these tools, I would encourage folks to join one of our committees. And that'll give you a sense of how we incorporate all of these tools into a centralized system, at least within that specific committee. That's a really good way to get experience. But otherwise, thank you all for attending today's session, and I hope again that this was useful to you.
Thank you, Bernie. That was great. And thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you very much.